Welcome to the Deep Dive. We take your sources, sift through them, and really pull out the most important bits of knowledge, helping you cut through all the noise.
That's the goal.
And today, we're plunging into a topic that, well, it impacts hundreds of thousands of lives every single year, yet it remains just steeped in controversy, swirling misinformation. We're talking about Lyme disease.
Indeed. And we have quite a stack of material here, everything from official medical guidelines, academic research,
Right.
to some surprising historical accounts, and also those deeply personal, often quite heartbreaking patient experiences.
Yeah, the patient stories are powerful.
Absolutely. So our mission today is to navigate this really complex landscape. We'll look at the scientific consensus, sure,
Right.
but also alongside some highly debated theories.
Okay.
Explore the origins, how it's diagnosed, how it's treated, and really unpack these intense discussions around persistent symptoms. And throughout, we'll keep a balanced, factual approach to the information you've given us, trying to give you the full picture, no bias.
Okay, let's unpack this then. By the end of this, you're going to have a comprehensive understanding of what we know, what's still fiercely debated, and what it all means, really, for you and for public health generally. We'll explore some claims from, well, prominent public figures. We'll even get into historical mysteries like the Plum Island bioweapon theory.
Oh, yes, that one always comes up.
Right, and we'll contrast the views of major medical organizations with, the powerful voices of patient advocacy groups.
It's a condition that really tests the boundaries, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Scientific understanding, public trust, human experience. It's all in there.
It really is. It's quite a journey we're taking today. The current landscape. Public figures and disease claims. So, to kick us off, we're seeing this, I guess, increasingly vocal intersection of public opinion and medical science. What happens when influential public figures, people with huge reach, start asserting views that, well, they dramatically diverge from established medical thinking, especially on things like infectious diseases or vaccines?
That's a really critical question because the impact, it can be profound, really profound. And we have a potent example right here in our sources with RFK Jr.'s, let's say, controversial stance on infectious diseases.
Yeah.
At an online campaign event, this was June 2023, he made a truly striking claim. He said, and this is a direct quote, "I do not believe that infectious disease is an enormous threat to human health."
Wow. Just flat out.
Flat out. And the key thing here isn't just what he claimed, but the inherent danger when someone with that kind of platform directly challenges centuries of public health understanding. I mean, his assertion fundamentally minimizes the ongoing devastation of infectious diseases.
Yeah.
These things have shaped civilizations, caused immense suffering.
Right, they still do.
Exactly. They still pose huge global challenges from seasonal flu to emerging pandemics. So that statement, just on its face, it stands in stark contrast to, well, reality.
Yeah.
And it potentially undermines efforts to protect people globally.
That's an astonishing statement. And he didn't stop there, did he? He made some specific claims about things like the Spanish flu and vaccine research.
He did. He asserted that, quote, "There is good evidence that even the Spanish flu came from vaccine research."
Okay, where does that come from?
Well, he expands on this belief, stating that immunization research, in his view, has, quote, "created some of the worst plagues in our history."
So vaccines didn't stop plagues, they created them, according to him?
According to him, these are incredibly significant and, frankly, quite startling claims. To suggest vaccine research, which is dedicated to preventing disease,
Right.
is actually the source of pandemics like the Spanish flu. It just directly challenges everything we know from science and history about epidemiology and vaccine science.
Okay, just for context, the Spanish flu, remind us of the scale of that.
Sure. The Spanish flu was a devastating influenza pandemic, 1918 to 1919. Infected maybe 500 million people. That's about a third of the world's population then.
A third. Wow.
And tragically caused somewhere between 20 to 50 million deaths worldwide.
Right.
So attributing its origin to vaccine research just runs counter to the vast body of evidence pointing to its natural zoonotic origin.
Meaning from animals to humans.
Exactly. It originated in animals, then jumped to humans. So when someone with such a public platform makes these kinds of claims, it risks undermining public trust in fundamental health interventions like vaccination. And these are cornerstone strategies globally for preventing and controlling infectious diseases.
Yeah.
This theme, questioning established science, promoting alternative explanations, it's a recurring pattern we're going to see as we dig deeper today.
And his views seem particularly relevant now, given the recent political developments. He also opposes things like WHO surveillance efforts. What's his reasoning there?
Yes, he's expressed strong opposition to plans by the World Health Organization, the WHO, to increase wildlife surveillance. His analogy for this is quite vivid. He likened it to looking for a gas leak with a lit match.
Implying that looking for viruses might actually cause an outbreak.
That seems to be the implication, that by actively searching for new infections in wild animals, we somehow risk causing or exacerbating outbreaks. But the scientific and public health rationale, as explained by experts like Marcia Castro at Harvard, is precisely the opposite. They emphasize examining these species-jumping cases to advocate for prevention. Things like reducing habitat loss, increasing testing of wild animals.
So finding it before it jumps.
Exactly. The goal is to understand the diseases they carry before they can infect people, to prevent future pandemics.
So his analogy, it really fundamentally misrepresents the purpose of surveillance, which is actually a proactive safety measure.
And given his potential nomination for a very high-level government health role, just how influential is his voice in this sphere?
His influence is, considerable. There's no exaggeration there. He was recently named by former President Trump as a potential head for the Department of Health and Human Services.
Head of HHS. That's huge. It's immense. That position would place him at the very helm of major public health initiatives in the U.S. So that potential appointment alone just underscores the reach and potential impact of his views. Plus, he has a well-established history of disseminating, false information, particularly the false links between immunizations and autism and cancer.
Right, widely debunked claims.
Widely and repeatedly debunked by the scientific community. But they have unfortunately resonated with parts of the public for years, despite overwhelming evidence against them. What's particularly notable now is that his, let's say, conspiratorial views on viruses themselves have gained comparatively less attention until more recently. It suggests maybe a broadening of his narrative.
And his podcast is popular.
Very. Spotify's 11th most popular in health and fitness. That underscores his reach, his ability to get these views out to a very large audience.
So you have this combination, a prominent platform, a history of unsubstantiated claims, a potential high-level government role.
Exactly. It creates this potent environment where skepticism towards established infectious disease science can become, deeply entrenched and widely spread. It signals a potential shift where evidence-based approaches might face increasing challenges from these influential non-scientific narratives.
Okay, so let's bring this back to Lyme disease specifically. How does this kind of skepticism, particularly around disease origins or vaccines, play out in the Lyme context? Is there a historical parallel?
Oh, absolutely. The skepticism isn't new, and its impact on Lyme disease is a really stark historical case study. Look at the 2022 report to Congress by the Tick-Borne Disease Working Group. This group includes experts, patients.
Right.
They noted that many surveyed Lyme patients incorrectly, quote, alleged scientific fraud and a cover-up regarding the origin of tick-borne diseases.
So not just questioning, but alleging a deliberate cover-up.
Exactly. A belief in deliberate obfuscation by official bodies. And this kind of deep-seated distrust, it has real, tangible consequences.
And one of those consequences was the fate of the Lymerix vaccine, wasn't it? Can you tell us more about that? How long was it around? Why did it disappear if it was supposed to help?
The story of Lymerix is, it's almost tragic, really. It powerfully shows how public distrust, fueled by misinformation, can sabotage a vital public health tool.
So what was it designed to do?
Lymerix was a recombinant vaccine developed by SmithKline Beecham, which is now GSK. It was designed to prevent Lyme disease. It used a specific protein from the bacteria, OspA, plus an adjuvant to boost the immune response.
And did it work in trials?
Yes. Clinical trials with over 10,000 people showed it was effective. It gave protective immunity in about 76% of adults after 3 doses.
That sounds pretty good. Any side effects?
The trial showed only mild or moderate and transient adverse effects. Minor things, temporary.
So the FDA approved it?
Yes. Based on those results, the FDA approved Lymerix in December 1998 for people aged 15 to 70.
Okay. Approved, effective. So why was it only available for 3 years?
Just 3 years, 1999 to 2002. Vaccine skepticism took hold. There were claims it was created solely for profit. Unsubstantiated allegations that it caused arthritis, other debilitating conditions.
Despite the trial data.
Despite the trial data. This led to a dramatic plummet in sales. So severe that the manufacturer eventually just agreed to discontinue the vaccine.
Wow. pulled because of plummeting sales driven by skepticism.
Exactly. It's a powerful example of how public perception, even when based on misinformation, can override scientific evidence and public health need. It left a huge gap in preventing a widespread disease. Really highlights the challenge of health communication when there's widespread distrust.
It's a real tragedy. And, Lyme disease isn't just an abstract thing for many people. It's a deeply personal struggle. We hear about it from high-profile figures, too, right? People like Justin Timberlake, Justin Bieber, Avril Lavigne, Shania Twain.
Yes, absolutely.
How have their stories impacted the public's understanding, or maybe misunderstanding, of Lyme?
Well, their public disclosures have undoubtedly brought a tremendous amount of visibility to Lyme disease. It moved it from maybe a niche concern to a mainstream topic.
Humanized it, in a way?
Exactly. Justin Timberlake described it as relentlessly debilitating. Bieber, Lavigne, Twain, they've all shared their personal struggles.
Right.
These narratives, coming from people so many admire, they humanize the disease in a way stats just can't.
Right.
They show it's not just some rare, localized thing. It can affect anyone, anywhere, and be severe, long-lasting. Their descriptions of fatigue, chronic pain, cognitive issues, they resonate deeply with patients who feel disbelieved or isolated.
But is there a downside to celebrity stories?
There can be. While raising awareness is vital, these personal accounts don't always capture the full complexity, the nuances of diagnosis, treatment, the difference between acute Lyme and these debated persistent symptoms.
Ah, okay.
So it can sometimes, unintentionally perhaps, contribute to public confusion, especially if celebrities or their circles promote unproven treatments or seem to align with certain controversial viewpoints.
So it's a double-edged sword, vital for awareness, but
potentially adding to the misinformation that complicates public understanding. They highlight the suffering, which is real and important, but the underlying science and treatment debates often remain murky in these public narratives. 2. The origin story. Unpacking Lyme disease discovery and the bioweapon theory.
okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me. How did we even come to understand Lyme disease as, its own distinct thing? It feels like it must have been around forever, but the modern medical understanding, that has a specific origin story, right?
That's right, and the modern origin story is a fascinating medical mystery that only began to unravel relatively recently. While the bacterium itself, as we'll see, is ancient, recognizing Lyme disease as a distinct clinical entity. That only happened in 1975.
1975. Where?
In Lyme, Connecticut. That's where the name comes from. There was this unusual cluster of arthritis cases, especially in kids, that caught the attention of locals and then public health officials.
So they initially called it Lyme arthritis.
Exactly, because that was the main symptom they were seeing, Lyme arthritis.
So who was the detective in this medical mystery? Who investigated this strange outbreak?
That assignment went to Alan Steer. He was a young rheumatology fellow at Yale at the time.
Okay.
He arrived in Lyme in '75 to look into this puzzling phenomenon. And Steer played an absolutely crucial role. He meticulously documented the symptoms, tracked the spread, and he eventually recognized that this Lyme arthritis was actually part of a broader tick-borne disease, one that was already known in Europe actually as erythema migrans.
Ah, the rash.
The rash, yes.
Yeah.
His early studies, even back in '77, started linking it to neurological and cardiac symptoms too. By '79, he was publishing about the chronic aspects. His diligence in correlating symptoms with geography was just foundational.
That's a huge leap. But finding the actual cause, the pathogen, that's often the hardest part, isn't it? When did they finally pin down the bug responsible?
The definitive breakthrough came a few years later, in 1982, and it was really proven in 1983. That's when Borrelia burgdorferi was identified as the causative agent.
Borrelia burgdorferi. Okay.
A monumental discovery. It's a spirochete that's a type of spiral-shaped bacterium, and they found it was transmitted by ticks.
Right.
So by 1984, with this confirmed, the bacterium recovered from patients, from ticks. Lyme disease could legitimately be defined as a tick-borne bacterial zoonosis.
Zoonosis meaning?
Meaning an infectious disease transmitted between species from animals to humans. In this case, small animals like rodents are the main reservoirs for the bacteria in the tick's life cycle.
And humans just get it accidentally.
We're inadvertent hosts, exactly.
Yeah.
We get infected incidentally when an infected tick bites us.
Yeah.
It's not part of the bacteria's natural cycle.
So that discovery really opened the door for targeted research, tests, treatments.
Absolutely, it changed everything. But what's fascinating here, as I hinted, is that the history of Borrelia burgdorferi itself goes back much further than the 1970s. Its recognition in the U.S. is recent, but the bacterium, ancient.
Ancient. How far back are we talking? Is there actual proof?
Oh, yes. Compelling proof. It existed millennia ago. The earliest known evidence was found in Otzi.
Otzi the Iceman, the mummy.
That's the one. The 5,300-year-old mummy found in the Alps. The preservation was incredible, allowing for genetic analysis. And they detected Borrelia burgdorferi DNA in his remains.
5,300 years ago. Wow. Okay, so that really pushes the timeline back.
Way back, into prehistory, long before any modern labs or interventions.
So that counters the idea of a modern artificial origin right there. What about in America specifically? Was it here anciently too, or did it arrive later?
The genetic evidence strongly suggests it was here for thousands of years too.
Really?
Yes. Studies indicate it spread from the Northeast out to the Midwest long before, the big ecological changes from post-colonial reforestation or the migrations in the 19th century.
So it was part of the natural ecosystem here for a very long time.
Exactly. It wasn't some sudden emergence in the 20th century. This deep historical and genetic context is crucial. It directly confronts those theories, suggesting a more recent, maybe artificial origin. Lyme disease, caused by B. burgdorferi, has a deep evolutionary history tied up with ticks and animals.
Okay, so despite all this historical evidence showing Lyme is ancient, this conspiracy theory linking it to Plum Island, it clearly has legs. It persists. It even got lawmakers involved, right? So what is Plum Island Animal Disease Center, and why is it such a focus for speculation about bioweapons and accidental releases?
You're right. The theory gained enough traction for legislative action, which is significant in itself. Plum Island Animal Disease Center, PIADC. It's a highly guarded federal animal research facility.
Off Long Island.
Off the coast of Long Island, yes.
Yeah.
For 70 years, its main mission has been studying foreign animal diseases, things like African swine fever, foot and mouth disease. The goal is protecting U.S. livestock and the food supply.
But its location and secrecy.
Exactly. Its isolated location, the secretive nature of the work involving dangerous animal pathogens. It's just become a magnet for theories. And its geographical proximity to Lyme, Connecticut, the original epicenter, that's really fueled the fire.
Right. So what are the specific allegations? Michael Christopher Carroll's book, Lab 257, seems key here.
It is. Carroll, in Lab 257, really hammered on what he called the suspicious proximity of Plum Island to Lyme, Connecticut.
Too close to be a coincidence, basically.
That was his argument. Too coincidentally close for the outbreak to be entirely natural, implying some connection beyond just chance. And beyond just location, his book and other sources detail specific concerning allegations about practices there.
Like what?
Things like the existence of a tick hatchery inside the facility.
A tick hatchery. Okay, that sounds bad in this context.
It certainly raises eyebrows, given Lyme is tick-borne. Then there were accusations of significant safety lapses, even open-air testing with biological agents.
Open-air testing with biological agents?
Yeah.
On an island?
That's the allegation, which suggests, the potential for uncontrolled release into the environment. Wind, water, birds. It paints a picture of a facility with potentially inadequate containment, where an accidental release or maybe even a deliberate one felt plausible to critics.
And this wasn't just book speculation. You mentioned Representative Chris Smith. What did his amendment try to do?
That's right. It resonated in government. In 2019, Rep. Chris Smith, a Republican from New Jersey, proposed an amendment mandating a Department of Defense Inspector General review.
A DOD review? Why DOD?
Because the allegation ties into potential past bioweapons research. The review was specifically tasked to investigate whether the DOD experimented with ticks and insects as biological weapons between 1950 and 1975.
Okay, so looking back at that specific time frame.
Yes, and crucially to determine the scope of those experiments. And here's the key part, whether any ticks or insects were released outside of any lab by accident or experiment design.
Released by accident or design, that's a heavy implication.
It is. The legislative inquiry itself shows how persistent and serious these concerns were, that they weren't just dismissed out of hand by everyone in power. Requesting the review lends official weight to the questions, regardless of the outcome.
And then there's that really unsettling claim, allegedly from Willy Burgdorfer himself, the guy who co-discovered the Lyme bacteria. What did he supposedly say?
Yes, this is one of the most controversial, most cited pieces of evidence for the bioweapon theory. Before he died, Willy Burgdorfer allegedly suggested Lyme disease was a research experiment gone wrong.
From the co-discoverer? That would be explosive.
Absolutely explosive, if definitively true and clear-headed. And this is a critical caveat. Burgdorfer was suffering from advanced Parkinson's disease at the time.
Parkinson's can affect clarity, speech.
Profoundly. It can impact speech, cognitive clarity, the ability to articulate complex thoughts accurately. So while the alleged statement fuels the theory, Its reliability is seriously questionable because of his medical condition.
So a nuanced piece of information easily taken out of context.
Precisely. Amplified to support a narrative.
Beyond Plum Island itself, what about these broader concerns about sloppy security in labs capable of bioweapons research? Are there documented incidents elsewhere that feed these fears?
Indeed. The concern about sloppy security isn't just about Plum Island. It's broader, feeding a general public apprehension. And yes, there are documented incidents. At Plum Island itself, there were 3 documented outbreaks of foot and mouth disease. Clear containment breaches.
Okay.
There was also a Rift Valley fever outbreak. They were testing weaponized RVF. Reportedly, some mosquitoes got out, bit scientists. Thankfully, treatments were known, but it raises the specter of wider release.
And not just Plum Island.
Not just Plum Island.
Yep.
Security breakdowns have happened even at highly secure places like the CDC. Dozens of safety problems recorded. There was an incident where a researcher at Fort Detrick accidentally stuck herself with an Ebola-containing needle. Exactly. Now, these incidents aren't directly linked to Lyme disease, obviously, but they illustrate a broader pattern of vulnerability in these high-containment labs. It feeds public suspicion about accidental releases and provides fertile ground for theories about where diseases might come from.
So given all that, what's the official response? What does the Department of Homeland Security, which oversees Plum Island now, say about the Lyme bioweapon theory? How do they counter it, especially with the ETSI evidence?
The Department of Homeland Security, DHS, explicitly dismisses the possibility of Lyme being a bioweapon. Their main counterargument rests squarely on that historical presence of the bacteria. As we discussed, Borrelia burgdorferi in Otzi 5,300 years ago, in ancient tick samples predating the lab.
Right. If it existed way back then.
Then it couldn't have been created or weaponized at Plum Island in the mid-20th century. The ancient history fundamentally undermines that idea. Biologically improbable.
Did Plum Island do any tick research, though, even if not weaponizing Lyme?
Yes, DHS acknowledges some tick research. In the 1990s, inside their biocontainment facility, they had a small colony of soft-bodied ticks from Africa.
Soft-bodied ticks, not the kind that carry Lyme.
Different kind. The research was specifically on African swine fever transmission between pigs using these ticks. DHS states explicitly these ticks were destroyed when the research was concluded.
Implying strict protocols for that specific project.
Yes. Highlighting that while tick research occurred, it was distinct in species and purpose from Lyme.
And what's happening with Plum Island now? Is it still operating?
Full decommissioning is planned, starting around December 2024, finishing late 2028.
Where are the operations moving?
To a new facility in Kansas, the USDA's National Bio and Agro Defense Facility, NBAF.
Kansas? Why there?
It's meant to modernize research, work closely with Kansas State University's Biosecurity Institute, but it sparked new concerns.
Oh, like what?
Critics point out it's in Tornado Alley, and its proximity to America's food supply raises new potential vulnerabilities, despite assurances of safety protections.
So, closing Plum Island might end one set of concerns, but the debate over locating these high-level labs continues.
It absolutely does, which naturally leads us to consider how far did these early biological warfare programs actually go? And what were the ethical boundaries, or maybe the lack thereof?
That's a really critical point, because the historical allegations, even if not directly tied to Lyme, they show how government secrecy and past actions can erode public trust, impacting health initiatives today. How did the U.S. even get into biowarfare research after WWII? And what ethical lines got crossed, according to the sources?
This is a critical area, yes. The early Cold War saw this intense drive for striking new valuable weapons, and that definitely included biological warfare. Post-WWII, the U.S. wanted complete mastery of biological warfare techniques for a striking advantage. Photetric scientists, seeing themselves as defending the Republic with secret science, were sent to assess and, well, expropriate Axis bioweapon capabilities.
So, learning from the enemy, essentially.
And adopting some of their mindset. There was this cultural fascination with superweapons. Some saw biological agents as potentially far more deadly than the atomic bomb.
But this pursuit quickly went into ethically dark places. You mentioned Frank Olson.
Yes, Frank Olson, the CIA whistleblower. He allegedly participated in experiments on infectious animal diseases, possibly including on Plum Island. Raises serious questions about what exactly was being researched. And the sources point to documented incidents suggesting a significant disregard for ethical norms back then.
Like the subway test.
Like the alleged 1977 Washington Post report detailing Army conducted 239 secret open-air germ warfare tests including one supposedly in the NYC subway.
Without public knowledge or consent.
Exactly. A blatant violation of the Nuremberg Code, which mandates informed consent for human experiments.
So the takeaway isn't necessarily that Lyme came from this, but that these documented historical breaches create lasting distrust.
Precisely. Government secrecy, documented ethical lapses in the past. They leave a scar on public trust. It provides fertile ground for conspiracy theories about anything the government does, whether connected or not. The impact on how people view official information today is immense and long-lasting. 3. The clinical picture. Diagnosis, treatment, and the chronic Lyme divide.
Okay, let's try to ground ourselves now in the established medical facts of Lyme disease. We've talked a lot about controversies, but clinically, what is it? How does it affect the body, according to mainstream medicine? Just the basics.
Right, to get back to the clinical picture.
Yeah.
From the conventional medical view, Lyme disease is caused by specific bacteria, primarily Borrelia burgdorferi here in North America, also Borrelia mayoni.
And transmitted by ticks.
Transmitted by the bite of infected ixodes ticks. Black-legged ticks, deer ticks, same thing.
It's common.
It's widely recognized as the most common vector-borne infectious disease in the temperate northern hemisphere. We're talking hundreds of thousands of people affected annually across North America and Eurasia.
Where is it most concentrated in North America?
Primarily 3 regions. The Northeast, from Virginia up into eastern Canada, the upper Midwest, especially Wisconsin and Minnesota, and parts of Northern California. The Ixodes scapularis tick vectors over 95% of cases here.
And the UK is seeing more cases, too.
Yes, cases are rising there, maybe 2,000, 3,000 annually reported, though geographical distribution varies.
How quickly can you get infected after a bite?
Transmission can happen relatively quickly. Studies suggest it might occur within 24 hours of the tick attaching, which really highlights why prompt tick removal is so important.
Okay, so it's a bacterial infection from a tick bite. What are the typical symptoms? How does it progress if you don't catch it early? It sounds like it can be quite multifaceted.
It really can be. Lyme disease presents with a wide range of symptoms, often progressing in stages if untreated. The most common early sign is that expanding red skin lesion, erythema migrans.
The bullseye rash.
Often, but not always, the classic bullseye. It appears at the site where the tick injected the bacteria. Along with the rash, many people, maybe 65% in the U.S., fewer in Europe, get constitutional symptoms. General stuff like fatigue, joint pain or stiffness, arthralgias, muscle aches, myalgias, headache.
And if it's not treated at that stage,
Then the spirochetes, the bacteria, can disseminate, spread from the initial site to other parts of the body.
Okay.
That can lead to swollen lymph nodes nearby, regional lymphadenopathy, maybe more rashes elsewhere, and later on, more serious, widespread problems affecting different organ systems.
you mentioned serious issues. What are the specific neurological, cardiac, rheumatologic impacts? I heard something about Johns Hopkins and brain fog.
Yes, the later stage impacts can be significant. Neurologically, you can see things like facial palsy, drooping face muscles.
Bell's palsy sometimes?
Sometimes confused with Bell's palsy, yes. Also neuropathies, nerve issues, and significant cognitive deficits. This brain fog patients describe impaired memory, trouble concentrating, feeling slow, difficulty multitasking. It's very common.
And the Johns Hopkins finding.
Ah, yes. Their rheumatology group highlighted work using advanced brain imaging, DTI and fMRI. These scans have actually shown brain changes linked to Lyme brain fog.
So physical changes in the brain.
Exactly. Which is critical because it suggests these cognitive problems are biological, not psychosomatic, even if standard cognitive tests don't always pick them up. DTI looks at white matter pathways. fMRI looks at brain activity during tasks.
Okay. What other neurological issues?
You can get more acute things, too. Meningitis, which is inflammation around the brain and spinal cord, painful radiculoneuritis, inflamed nerve roots causing severe pain, mononeuropathy, multiplex, damage to multiple individual nerves, and issues with cranial nerves, especially the facial nerve.
And cardiac impacts?
If it disseminates to the heart, symptoms can include palpitations, irregular heartbeat, shortness of breath, dyspnea, swelling edema, lightheadedness, chest pain, even fainting, syncope. The more severe form is myopericarditis, inflammation of the heart muscle and the sac around it.
And joints. Lyme arthritis.
Yes, rheumatologically, untreated Lyme can lead to chronic joint inflammation. Lyme arthritis typically affects large joints, most often the knee, but also shoulders, ankles, elbows, wrists.
So it can really mimic a lot of other conditions.
Exactly. Especially in later stages with these complex, often non-specific symptoms. One reviewer called it the new great imitator. Makes diagnosis tricky if that initial rash was missed or didn't happen.
So, with such a wide range of symptoms, how is it typically diagnosed? Especially if that early rash is key, but maybe not always present or recognized. What are the standard lab tests?
Good question. For that classic erythema migrans rash, especially if it's new, say 2 weeks or less, diagnosis is primarily clinical.
Meaning based on symptoms and history.
Exactly. The doctor diagnoses based on the rash appearance and exposure risk, not mainly on lab tests. Because current antibody tests or direct detection tests often aren't sensitive enough that early, they might miss it.
So, tests aren't reliable right at the beginning.
Not reliably positive, no. If the rash is unusual or there's doubt, they might do tests, maybe blood samples a few weeks apart, to look for rising antibody levels.
Okay. What about for symptoms that show up later, weeks or months after the bite?
For those later symptoms beyond the initial rash, lab diagnosis relies mainly on looking for antibodies in the blood serum.
Antibodies the body makes against the bacteria.
Precisely. The standard approach is a two-step or two-tiered protocol.
You mentioned that before. How does it work?
It usually involves an initial screening test, like an EIA or IFA, if that's positive or borderline.
Then you do a second test.
Then you do confirmatory Western blot tests, looking for specific IgM and IgG antibodies. This two-step process is like a double check. It significantly improves accuracy, makes it very good at detecting infection when present and ruling it out when absent.
So these later stage tests are pretty reliable.
Highly sensitive for these later manifestations, yes. And highly specific, meaning accurate when done and interpreted correctly. And here's a crucial point. A negative IgG antibody test in someone who hasn't been treated but has had symptoms for months or years that essentially rules out Lyme disease, barring rare lab errors or immune issues.
Okay, that's important. A negative test after months of symptoms is pretty conclusive.
Generally, yes. And the value of any test increases when you combine the result with the clinical picture symptoms, history, risk factors like tick exposure in a known Lyme area.
Makes sense. What about co-infections, other things ticks carry?
Good point. In areas where Lyme is common, doctors should also think about co-infections transmitted by the same ticks. Things like anaplasmosis, babesiosis.
Especially if symptoms are severe.
Especially with things like persistent high fever or certain lab abnormalities like low platelets, low white blood cells, or signs of anemia. It's about a comprehensive diagnostic approach. But this diagnosis part, and especially what follows, this is where the narrative becomes highly contested. Understanding the different treatment approaches is critical. The disagreement over persistent symptoms after treatment. That's the crux of the Lyme Wars.
Okay, let's dive into that. Let's start with the Infectious Diseases Society of America, the IDSA, major medical group. What do their 2020 guidelines say about treating Lyme? Early stage, arthritis, neurological stuff.
Right, the IDSA. Their 2020 guideline is evidence-based, developed by a multidisciplinary panel including neurology, AAN, and rheumatology, ACR experts. They aim for an authoritative stance, using the grade system to rate evidence certainty.
So what do they recommend? For prevention.
For prevention, after a high-risk tick bite, they strongly recommend a single dose of oral doxycycline within 72 hours.
Okay, a preventative dose. What about early Lyme, the rash stage?
For early Lyme, with the erythema migrans rash, the recommendation is oral antibiotics, doxycycline, amoxicillin, or ciprofloxacin acetyl for 10 to 21 days.
Standard antibiotic course.
Yes, meant to resolve symptoms faster and prevent the infection spreading.
And for Lyme arthritis?
Oral antibiotics, but for longer 28 days.
Neurological Lyme?
For neurological involvement, if it affects the brain or spinal cord directly, they strongly recommend 4V intravenous antibiotics over oral ones.
Okay, that seems fairly clear-cut for those stages, but the big controversy is persistent symptoms, right? What does IDSA say about patients who still feel sick after getting that standard treatment? This seems to be the major fault line.
This is precisely the most contentious point in the IDSA guidelines. For patients who have persistent or recurring nonspecific symptoms, fatigue, pain, cognitive issues, after the recommended treatment. And crucially, if there's no objective evidence of reinfection or treatment failure.
Objective evidence meaning?
Meaning clear signs like ongoing arthritis, swelling, meningitis, proven neuropathy, not just subjective symptoms like fatigue or pain.
Okay, so if there's no objective evidence.
Then the IDSA strongly recommends against additional antibiotic therapy.
Strongly against more antibiotics. Why?
Their position is twofold. First, they argue these lingering symptoms are common in the general population anyway. And second, fundamentally, they state that, quote, there has yet to be a single high-quality clinical study that demonstrates benefit to prolonging antibiotic therapy beyond 1 month. They believe these lingering symptoms aren't due to ongoing active Borrelia infection, but maybe some post-infectious process, like an overactive immune response or something else.
So they see no proof it helps and potential harm.
Exactly. This firm recommendation directly clashes with the experiences and beliefs of many patients and certain advocacy groups, fueling enormous controversy.
That is a very firm stance, strongly against prolonged antibiotics without objective proof. But it clearly clashes with so many patient reports of feeling better on longer treatment. What's their strongest argument for this position, beyond lack of proof? What risks are they worried about?
Their primary argument against prolonged antibiotic use is really that risk-benefit analysis. On one hand, as they see it, there's no proven benefit from high-quality trials for these extended courses, especially for those nonspecific persistent symptoms.
Yeah.
They don't believe post-treatment Lyme disease syndrome, PTLDS, symptoms mean active infection.
Okay, lack of proven benefit. What's the risk side?
The risks are significant, they emphasize. Prolonged antibiotic therapy carries real dangers. Serious infections like Clostridioides difficile, or C. diff,
Which can be really nasty.
can be severe, even life-threatening.
Yeah.
Also, complications from long-term IV catheters, infections, clots, and there have even been documented deaths linked to prolonged IV antibiotic therapy for presumed Lyme.
Wow, okay. So known dangers versus unproven efficacy.
That's their core position, weighing unproven efficacy against known serious dangers.
What about the criticisms against their guidelines? Allegations of conflicts of interest on the panel, relying too much on weaker evidence or expert opinion? How do they respond to that?
They've publicly maintained their process is rigorous and objective. They acknowledge panel members have diverse professional relationships, research funding, patents, consulting, but assert these are managed by conflict of interest policies.
Arguing expertise requires involving people active in the field.
Essentially, yes. That inclusion is necessary for comprehensive guidelines. As for relying on level 3 evidence, the weakest level, which is basically expert opinion.
Right, 38 to 71 recommendations based on that.
They'd likely argue that for complex diseases where high-quality randomized trials are scarce, carefully vetted expert consensus is sometimes the best available evidence.
Even after that Connecticut Attorney General investigation found irregularities.
Even after that, the AG investigation in 2008 did force a reassessment, but an independent review panel in 2010 almost unanimously upheld the guidelines. The IDSA's response generally emphasizes the scientific rigor, as they see it, and the lack of conclusive evidence for efficacy and safety of prolonged antibiotics, even facing persistent patient suffering.
Okay, so in direct contrast, we have the International Lyme and Associated Diseases Society, ILADS. What's their core philosophy on persistent symptoms? How do their guidelines differ fundamentally?
ILADS approaches this from a completely different starting point, especially regarding persistent symptoms. Unlike ILADS operates on the belief that persistent symptoms are often due to active infection that continues beyond that short course of standard antibiotics.
So they think the bugs are still there?
That's their working hypothesis. Therefore, they advocate for antibiotic treatment that extends beyond those typical short durations, say beyond 30 days.
How do they justify that, evidence-wise?
Their guidelines also use the GRADE methodology, aiming for evidence-based recommendations. But they emphasize a patient-centered approach, meaning they factor in not just the quality of scientific evidence, but also risk-benefit assessments of different therapies and patient values and preferences, what the patient wants, what they're willing to try. ILADS critiques the IDSA's interpretation of studies, arguing key endpoints were often inadequately designed or underpowered to really detect nuances of persistent infection or ongoing symptoms.
So they think the studies IDSA relies on weren't good enough.
That's a core part of their critique. Their recommendations emphasize ongoing reassessment after initial treatment, flexible modification or stopping treatment based on how the individual patient responds.
More individualized, less rigid protocol.
Exactly. More adaptive. The core philosophical difference is stark. Are lingering symptoms an ongoing, treatable infection, ILAD's view, or a post-infectious syndrome not responsive to more antibiotics, IDSA view?
Okay, so this brings us right to the absolute core of the scientific fight. Does Borrelia burgdorferi, the Lyme bacteria, actually persist after standard treatment or not? This seems like the question driving all this heat, and maybe the science isn't fully settled.
You've absolutely nailed it. That is the central, highly contested question. Does B. burgdorferi persist after standard antimicrobials? It's the bedrock of these heated controversies. The IDSA stance, as we said, is no, it doesn't persist in a way that causes ongoing symptoms responsive to antibiotics. Therefore, prolonged antibiotics are unnecessary, potentially harmful.
But is there evidence pointing the other way?
There is a growing body of evidence suggesting potential persistence. It's a very active area of research, which makes it so complicated.
So what kind of evidence suggests persistence?
Well, while IDSA sees no proof of active treatable infection, other research suggests the bacteria might hide or become very difficult to grow in lab dishes after
Flip
treating.
into stealth mode, kind of?
That's a good analogy. Makes them incredibly hard to detect and kill off completely. For instance, studies in mice and other animals have shown burgdorferi detection even after apparently adequate antibiotic treatment.
They find bacterial traces.
Researchers have found low levels of bacterial DNA or RNA in tissues of infected mice months after treatment. And importantly, some studies using advanced microscopy have seen a resurgence of spirochetes, visualizing them in ticks and mouse tissues even when these bacteria were in a non-culturable state.
Meaning they're there, but won't grow in a standard lab test.
Exactly, making them harder to detect with standard methods. Some experiments have even confirmed common antibiotics, failing to eradicate certain forms of burgdorferi in mice.
So maybe not all bacteria respond the same way to antibiotics.
That's a key hypothesis, that burgdorferi populations in patients might be heterogeneous in their tolerance. Certain variants might be more resistant, able to persist after treatment that kills off most of the others.
And does this line up with any clinical observations?
Well, the observation that repeated or extended antibiotic treatment does lead to improvement or even cure in some cases of Lyme arthritis, and improvement in PTLDS symptoms in some patients. Proponents of persistence see this as consistent with the idea of antimicrobial tolerant bacteria sticking around.
Consistent with, but not definitive proof.
Exactly. It's important to stress that while these observations are consistent with persistence, more research is definitely needed to establish that connection firmly and figure out the overall effectiveness and safety of prolonged treatment for the broader patient population. The challenge is reconciling clinical observations, patient experiences, and the rigorous scientific evidence, and defining what effective, safe treatment really looks like for everyone, the patient experience and advocacy.
Okay, shifting gears a bit. Beyond all the scientific debates, there's the very real, often just heartbreaking reality for patients living with this. Many people use terms like post-treatment Lyme disease syndrome, PTLDS, and chronic Lyme disease, CLD, almost interchangeably. But you're saying they're quite distinct in the medical world. Can you clarify that difference? Why does it matter?
You're absolutely right. The distinction is crucial, even though the terms get conflated all the time in public discussion. And yeah, it matters a lot in how patients are viewed and treated. Think of it like this. Post-treatment Lyme disease syndrome, or PTLDS, is a recognized medical condition. It's where symptoms, fatigue, pain, brain fog, linger after someone had confirmed Lyme disease and was treated according to standard guidelines.
So the initial infection is confirmed, treated, but symptoms remain.
Exactly. But, and this is key, the mainstream medical view is that these lingering symptoms in PTLDS are not due to an ongoing active infection.
So what is causing them then?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
The exact mechanism, the pathogenesis, isn't fully settled. Maybe the immune system stays overactive even after the bugs are gone. Maybe there's some residual tissue damage. Researchers are exploring various post-infectious inflammatory processes.
Okay, so PTLDS acknowledges the symptoms are real, but attributes them to after effects, not active bugs. How common is it?
It's estimated to affect maybe 5 to 10% of patients treated for Lyme, so a significant minority.
Okay, now contrast that with chronic Lyme disease, or CLD. How is that different?
Chronic Lyme disease, or CLD, is a much more controversial term. It's distinct from both PTLDS and active late-stage Lyme. CLD is often used by patients, media, and a subset of doctors as an umbrella term. It covers all sorts of chronic symptoms that are attributed to a Borrelia infection.
Attributed, okay. What's the key difference from PTLDS?
The key difference is that CLD diagnoses are frequently made without clear evidence of current or even past Lyme-specific signs, like the rash or confirmed arthritis, and often without support from conventional lab tests confirming active infection.
So the link to Lyme is assumed, not necessarily proven by standard criteria.
That's often the case. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, CLD is often considered a contested illness.
Meaning
There's significant controversy about its biological origin. The vast majority of medical professionals, biomedical researchers, they don't support persistent Borrelia infection as the explanation for the symptoms in many people labeled with CLD.
And some go further.
Some mainstream medical professionals and organizations, In cases lacking objective evidence of infection, even label the promotion of CLD diagnoses and treatments as health fraud.
Wow, that's strong language.
It is. And this contestation creates a really profound divide. You have patients suffering from genuine, often debilitating symptoms caught right in the middle of these conflicting medical paradigms.
Yeah, that brings us straight to the frustration patients report. If mainstream medicine isn't fully validating their experience or attributing it to something else, where do they turn? What's that journey like? It sounds incredibly isolating.
It truly is. The journey for many patients with these persistent, often unexplained symptoms is unfortunately marked by profound frustration. They report almost universally negative experiences with healthcare providers, feeling disbelieved, feeling inadequately addressed by the mainstream medical community.
Which must lead to just desperation.
Absolutely. A deep sense of frustration and, understandably, a desperate search for alternative explanations and care. Their symptoms, the profound fatigue, the widespread pain, the cognitive difficulties are often invisible. They don't show on the outside in ways others easily grasp or empathize with.
Making it harder for people to understand what they're going through.
Exactly. This invisibility contributes hugely to their isolation. It impacts every single aspect of their life, work, social activities, relationships, hobbies.
Are there documented health impacts beyond the physical symptoms?
Yes. Studies show higher rates of depression, persistent joint pain, arthralgia, and significantly lower health-related quality of life among these patients compared to the general population.
So this dissatisfaction drives them to look elsewhere.
Naturally, it leads them to explore alternative therapies and practitioners, integrative medicine doctors who blend approaches, practitioners often called Lyme-literate medical doctors or LLMDs, naturopaths, acupuncturists. These practitioners often adopt that CLD perspective and offer treatments that go beyond the standard IDSA guidelines.
Okay, you mentioned alternative therapies. What kinds of things do patients explore? Herbal supplements, other treatments? And what does the info we have say about whether they work or are safe? Just the general ideas.
Right. Patients exploring alternative and integrative routes often turn to a wide range of things. Herbal supplements are common. Our sources mention examples like andrographis, cat's claw, Japanese knotweed, sweet wormwood, oil of oregano.
Why those specific herbs? What's the thinking?
Many of these do have documented anti-inflammatory effects, so that might contribute to patients feeling some symptomatic improvement, maybe by reducing general inflammation rather than directly killing persistent bacteria.
So maybe helping symptoms, but not necessarily the root cause if it's infection.
That's the uncertainty, and here's the crucial point. While some of these herbs show limited activity against Borrelia in a test tube,
In vitro, right?
in vitro, yes, there's a significant lack of robust studies in living organisms, in vivo, and especially well-designed human clinical trials.
So we don't really know if they work in people for Lyme.
Their actual efficacy and safety in human patients for treating Lyme disease remain largely unproven. For example, teasel root, another one sometimes used, showed no activity in the source data we looked at.
Are there safety concerns with these herbs interactions?
Absolutely. A significant concern is the knowledge gap about how they interact with prescription medications.
Like blood thinners, blood pressure meds.
Exactly. Clinicians need to be cautious, especially with anticoagulants, hypertension meds, diabetes meds. Many herbs can have additive effects, potentially increasing risks of bleeding or blood pressure or blood sugar dropping too low.
So patients need careful counseling if they use these.
Definitely. Thorough counseling to monitor for potential adverse effects from interactions is key.
What about other non-herbal alternative therapies mentioned?
Patients explore various other things too. Low-dose naltrexone, LDN, it's thought to maybe modulate the immune response and shows some promise for chronic pain in small studies. Thymosin alpha-1, TA1, supposedly helps normalize immune function. Ozone therapy administered various ways with reported benefits like fighting tumors, detoxification, increasing oxygenation, though again, needing more robust proof for Lyme.
Hormonal therapies too.
Yes, looking at things like thyroid hormone uptake, using markers like reverse T3. There's also talk of a broader multi-system treatment approach addressing underlying issues like immune dysfunction based on various markers.
And simple things like diet.
Absolutely. Dietary changes are huge in patient self-management. Some report improvement, weight loss, with things like green juices, specific herbs like garlic or cilantro, again, mostly anecdotal or from less rigorous studies, not high-quality evidence for widespread clinical efficacy for Lyme itself.
Okay. It's clear patients are suffering. They're actively searching. And this naturally leads to a powerful patient advocacy movement. How has this movement shaped the conversation, even laws, around Lyme? And are there downsides, perils, to such passionate advocacy?
Yes, the profound suffering, the feeling of being dismissed,
Hmm.
it has absolutely fueled a powerful patient advocacy movement. Groups like Project Lyme, blinddisease.org, they've become significant voices, amplifying patient experiences, pushing for recognition and treatment of what they often term chronic Lyme disease.
Hmm.
But this leads us to a crucial point. How does that passion, that urgency from patients sometimes clash with the necessarily rigorous, often slow pace of scientific validation?
Yeah, science is slow. Patients need help now. That's a tough tension.
It's a very tough tension. Scientific validation is methodical,
Yeah.
incremental. It needs reproducible evidence, usually from large controlled studies. Patient advocacy is driven by immediate acute suffering demanding solutions now. This can lead to embracing treatments that maybe lack that robust evidence.
And that can lead to promoting misinformation.
That's the risk some observers point to, particularly from groups focused on chronic Lyme disease. And this is where the peril can become quite severe.
Oh, severe.
A really stark, concerning example is the harassment faced by mainstream researchers. Alan Thier, remember, co-discoverer, leading expert.
Right.
He faced severe consequences for his stance. He was, according to reports, targeted, harassed, and threatened with death by patients and advocacy groups.
Death threats for his scientific opinion.
Yes, because he refused to validate chronic Lyme disease diagnoses and endorse long-term antibiotics. The intimidation got so bad he was assigned security guards.
That's appalling. That goes way beyond advocacy.
It absolutely does. It shows how, in extreme cases, the fervor can morph into hostility, shutting down scientific discourse and threatening personal safety.
And this dynamic affects policy too, the politicization of medical science.
Yes. We see legislative efforts at state levels. Pennsylvania, California, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Minnesota, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York are mentioned. These laws often aim to mandate insurance coverage for long-term antibiotics or protect doctors who prescribe them, frequently citing the lack of consensus in the medical community as justification.
Using the controversy itself to push for specific policies.
Exactly. And federal bills trying to set up working groups with the diversity of scientific perspectives. Yeah. Implicitly trying to legitimize alternative viewpoints at the policy level.
So while advocacy is vital for attention,
It can risk embedding unproven treatments into healthcare policy, potentially prioritizing political pressure over evidence-based medicine.
and the mental health toll on patients through all this.
Immense. The sources highlight isolation and depression, and this stark statement that suicide is a big problem in the Lyme disease community.
That's devastating.
It really underscores the critical need for community support. Those online groups, local meetings, they provide a vital sense of belonging, solidarity, for people battling what often feels like an invisible illness, caught in this crossfire. So yes, advocacy empowers, but it navigates complex, difficult ethical and scientific terrain, sometimes with severe unintended consequences. The economic and societal impact.
Okay, beyond the individual patient story, which is incredibly compelling, what's the broader societal picture, the economic footprint of Lyme disease? What does it cost us collectively?
The economic and societal impact is far more substantial than most people probably realize, especially when you look beyond just the direct medical bills.
How many cases are we really talking about?
Well, reported cases to the CDC are over 30,000 a year. But the CDC itself estimates the true prevalence is likely closer to a staggering 476,000 cases annually in the U.S.
Almost 500,000 a year. Wow.
And it's on the rise. This huge prevalence translates directly into significant economic burdens. And here's a crucial distinction. Understanding the difference between direct treatment costs and lost economic output.
Okay.
For chronic illnesses generally, it's estimated that a massive 79% of the total cost comes from lost economic output. That's lost wages, disability, lower GDP.
Only 21% is direct medical cost.
Only 21%. That's the estimate.
So that's a huge disparity. What does that mean for who actually pays for Lyme disease? Sounds like insurers are only covering a small slice.
Exactly right. Insurers typically only cover the direct medical costs, the doctor visits, the tests, the short-term antibiotics, usually. This means the vast majority of the financial burden, especially as the disease progresses into later stages, is borne by patients, their families, their communities, and ultimately the government.
How does the government end up paying?
Through things like lost tax revenues, because people can't work, and through disability support payments for those who become disabled by the illness. For late-stage Lyme disease, One estimate suggests a striking 86% of the annual costs are due to lost productivity and non-medical costs, things like needing caretakers. Only 14% are direct medical costs.
86% non-medical for late stage. That's incredible. Do we have actual cost figures?
We do. Early Lyme, caught and treated quickly, might cost around $1,600 total.
Okay. Manageable,
Relatively. But late-stage Lyme, that can cost approximately $20,000 annually.
Annually.
Not total, annually. A recurring cost for as long as the person remains ill and unable to function fully, unable to work.
So the burden shifts dramatically from the healthcare system to society as it progresses.
Massively.
Yeah.
And the challenge is compounded because even early treatment isn't a guaranteed cure. That Johns Hopkins study by Dr. Akot
Right, you mentioned that.
found that 36% of those treated right at the EM rash stage remain ill 6 months after treatment.
Over a third still sick after early treatment.
Yes. Underscoring that current early interventions often fail to prevent long-term suffering and those huge associated costs. It creates this significant drain on public resources that, as the sources say, we can't afford to ignore. Which raises an important question. If the costs are so high and treatment failures are unfortunately common, why isn't more research focused squarely on solutions that directly address patient needs, getting people better?
That is the critical question, isn't it? Given this massive economic hit, the human cost, why does Lyme research funding seem, well, inadequate or maybe misdirected? What's the core problem identified by people looking at the funding landscape?
Yeah, the critique from the Lyme community and experts like Chris Newby, who wrote Bitten, is exactly that. Despite the huge burden, Lyme research is consistently underfunded and, crucially, often misdirected.
How much funding are we talking about?
Over the last 11 years, the National Institutes of Health, the NIH, allocated an average of only about $32 million per year for Lyme disease research.
$32 million a year for nearly 500,000 cases annually. How does that compare?
It's considered small compared to budgets for other major diseases like malaria or HIV/AIDS. While those are huge global threats, Lyme's rapidly rising domestic prevalence and chronic impact arguably warrants more.
But it's not just the total amount, right? It's how it's spent.
That's the core problem highlighted by Newby. Most of that relatively small amount goes to basic research.
Meaning lab stuff, tick biology.
Cellular processes, tick biology, fundamental mechanisms of the bacteria, stuff that's important for foundational knowledge, yes, but often doesn't directly translate into immediate improvements for patients now.
So it's not focused on diagnostics and treatments.
Newby argues these funds are being diverted from what she calls mission-critical research. Research aims specifically at improving diagnostic tests and therapies that would directly help patients get better, recover faster, and avoid those long-term costs.
So it's not just about the dollar figure, but what those dollars are actually funding. And those treatment failure rates you mentioned really amplify the urgency for more targeted research, don't they?
They absolutely do. The current failure rates just underscore the desperate need for more effective solutions. As Chris Newby points out, at least 10 to 20% of patients treated early fail treatment.
10 to 20% fail even when caught early.
Yes. And for those diagnosed later, in later stages, the treatment failure rates are even higher.
Meaning a huge number of people are left suffering long term.
A significant portion, yes. Even those diagnosed and treated promptly by current standards continue to suffer debilitating symptoms. This leads to that clear, desperate call from the Lyme community for diagnostic tests and treatment protocols that work and are rapid.
They draw parallels to COVID-19.
Exactly. They argue, if rapid diagnostics and treatments could be developed so quickly for a novel virus, why can't similar focused efforts be applied to Lyme, a disease known for decades?
It's a powerful point.
It really is. And this unmet need highlights the critical role of patient and advocate engagement. Newby's blueprint for action suggests patients engage Congress, support organizations like the Bay Area Lyme Foundation.
Why those foundations specifically?
Because they often provide crucial seed research money for early-stage projects. This seed funding is vital. Researchers often need that initial data, that proof of concept, to even apply for larger NIH grants. And NIH is less likely to fund brand new high-risk ideas.
So these foundations fill a critical gap to get promising ideas off the ground.
Precisely. This collective action advocating funding early research is seen as essential to shift the landscape towards more patient-centric solutions, ultimately aiming to reduce the long-term suffering and the immense economic burden of Lyme disease. Outro.
Wow. We have navigated a truly complex landscape today. I mean, From ancient mummies all the way to modern controversies, from that tiny spirit sheet bacterium to global economic impacts, it is undeniably clear that Lyme disease is so much more than just a medical condition. It's this nexus, isn't it? Scientific inquiry, historical speculation, profound human experience, all tangled together.
Absolutely. Precisely. What we've seen today is just such a powerful illustration of how medical science, public perception, patient advocacy, how they all intertwine, sometimes clash. It really forces us to critically examine how we define illness itself, how we interpret evidence, especially conflicting evidence, and how we address the very real suffering of people whose experiences don't fit neatly into diagnostic boxes.
Yeah.
Those historical allegations about government secrecy, whether directly linked to Lyme or not, they show how easily trust erodes, impacting public health efforts today. The different medical guidelines show fundamental scientific disagreements are still happening on complex conditions. And the patient experience just reveals the immense human cost of these unresolved questions, and both the power and sometimes the perils of advocacy.
So after all this, what does it mean for you, listening? As you reflect on this deep dive, maybe consider this provocative thought. In this age we live in, information overload, rapidly evolving science, how can we as individuals, as a society, make sure that both empathy and rigorous evidence guide our approach to health, especially when we're faced with conditions as complex, as contested as Lyme disease? What steps can you take personally to better navigate these turbulent waters in your own pursuit of being well informed?